Hello, UCLA.
Before we get going, Laurie does have a brief caveat on the content she wants to share on behalf of herself and Rachel.
Thank you. So excited to be here. So I think we can all agree that there are a lot of problems that need to be solved in the world, including sexual ones. This event is aimed at solving only one of these many problems, the orgasm gap that exists when cisgender women get it on with cisgender men. Or in other words, when people born with penises who identify with men get it on with people born with vaginas who identify as women. The reason we aren't focusing on sex between two women is because there isn't a problem in this context. Yes. When two women get it on, both generally orgasm. In fact, we can take a serious lesson from lesbian sex in terms of closing the orgasm gap. Women's orgasms problem only surface when a penis enters the picture or the vagina. In fact, in a fascinating recent study of women who identified as bisexual, it revealed that they report orgasming 65% of the time in first hookup sex with other women, compared to 7% of the time in first hookup sex with men. It's okay. We also have almost no research on how the orgasm gap plays out if one or more partners identifies as transgender or non-gender binary. So anyone out there in UCLA looking for a research study, your senior honors thesis, whatever, hit me up, email me after the event, and I've got a good idea for you. But anyway, this lack of research is why tonight we're focusing on cisgender women who get it on with cisgender men, and this is who we are referring to when we use the terms women and men. Rachel and I believe it's important to state this, because when we use these words without explaining why we're using them, and instead assume they capture everyone, we are linguistically erasing gender-diverse individuals. Gender-diverse individuals face not only common cultural linguistic erasure, akin to the linguistic erasure of the clitoris you are bound to hear about tonight, but also enormous societal discrimination. This event is in no way intended to contribute to this discrimination or erasure. It's simply that our goal is to help solve one cultural problem, the orgasm gap, that it's a problem in heterosexual sex. And what we know about this problem, we know from research on cisgender individuals. In short, this talk will be both heterosexual and cisgender focused because that's where the problem is. But we still hope that anyone and everyone with a clitoris or who gets it on with someone with a clitoris will benefit. So let's get going and help UCLA close the orgasm gap and get cliterate.
Yay! Well said, Dr. Mintz. Well said. So my first question for you, I think there is this assumption that part of the orgasm gap, that a big part is caused by men just like being selfish and not wanting to pleasure a woman. But I find that once you actually tell a guy how your body works, they're actually very willing to learn. What percentage of the orgasm gap would you say is caused by men being selfish, and what percentage is them just not knowing any better?
I think I've heard all that too, that the orgasm gap is about men being selfish and not caring. Sure, there's a few. Run if you find one, fast. But the majority of men really want to pleasure women. And in fact, there was another study that found they want to pleasure them so much that they feel emasculated and not as worthy when they don't make a woman orgasm. They want to, but they've been misguided and they don't know. They've been watching these porn images of they stick their penis in and it's all like, oh! And so they don't know what they're doing. They want to. So the problem is the culture. It's not women, it's not men, it's the culture.
What is the percentage of women or anyone with a clitoris that can only come from direct stimulation of the clitoris?
Oh, I love that question. I've got those stats. Yay! So it's pretty interesting. There's like a history of the way research is conducted is even intercourse focused, because they would ask women, what do you orgasm from intercourse? And about 25 to 30% would say, oh, I do. But they never thought to ask, well, is your clitoris also getting stimulated at the same time? So recent studies, when they've said, do you orgasm only from penetration alone? 15 to 18% only. And when I've conducted research where I ask people a question that's just devoid of intercourse at all and say, what's your most reliable route to orgasm? Only 4% say penetration alone. 4%.
I mean, I actually this is invasive, but I'm not a professor here, so I can't get sued. If you're comfortable, clap along with these questions, and if you're not, for people in this audience who have a clitoris, clap if you can come from penetration alone. Fortunate. I am envious. And then clap if you have found that you need direct stimulation to your clitoris. Thank you. I do find that I meet a significant amount of women who can come from penetration, and so I think that it's not no one, but it still seems like a significant percentage needs some sort of direct stimulation. And I guess my question is, why would God do this? Why men? The thing that if we look at heteronormative penetrative sex as being the way that we make more us's, right? Like the primal reason we make more us's, and the way that men make the us is they put the penis in and the penis comes. So why it has been somewhat, I know, proven that when women orgasm, the muscles in the orgasm push the sperm up the vaginal cavity. I've heard some evidence. Why have we not evolved to have the center of our sexual pleasure be in our vagina, if that is how we are supposed to reproduce?
Great question. So there's all these theories about the evolutionary adaptiveness of female orgasm. And that one you were talking about is called the upsuck theory, that you have to have an orgasm to have the sperm sucked up. It's actually been disproven, because how many women have gotten pregnant without an orgasm? So there's wonderful scholar, Elizabeth Lloyd, wrote this book and she debunked all these theories and said the female orgasm is just sort of like male nipples, it's just a vestige. But there's two theories there's a really new theory that's amazing, and then a feminist anthropological theory that's my favorite. The new theory that's come out is so interesting. Basically, what they did is they looked at some other mammals, and some other mammals have their clitoris in their vagina. And every time they have penetration, they not only have an orgasm, but the orgasm stimulates ovulation. And the theory is our clitoris used to be in our vagina, but when we started living in groups, we started putting a lot of penises in a lot of vaginas more often, and so the clitoris, it got confusing. So the clitoris, they say, migrated out. That's an interesting theory. No one can ever prove it, but my favorite theory is a feminist anthropological theory, and it says that the reason that women don't orgasm from penetration is what's adaptive, because a guy who's going to focus on your pleasure in bed is going to be a good partner outside of bed.
I will attest to that. That makes a lot of sense. Can you explain, I've heard this idea that all orgasms come from the clitoris, even ones that are vaginal or even anal. Can you explain how the nerves of the clitoris work?
Sure. And there's actually debate about that. You know, are there clitoral orgasms? Are there vaginal orgasms? Are they all the same? And I kind of tend to say I don't like the question about that because it sets up this hierarchy. Like vaginal orgasms are the best, and clitoral ones are not as good. And well, if you get them combined, it's medium. But the bottom line is the clitoris. And I'm wearing these clitoris earrings that...
If you can see, they look basically like penguins because it's meant to simulate, there's the clit, and then I believe it's the nerves that come out of the clit that wrap around the vagina. I have the same earrings, that's why I know.
Exactly. So a lot of theories are, and a lot of research says no matter where the stimulation is, the clitoris is involved, whether you're touching it directly or if you are orgasming from penetration. And if you do, good for you, that's great. There's no better or worse. It's however you orgasm is fine. But when the penis goes in and out, there's these bulbs, these clitoral bulbs that surround the vagina, and sometimes that's where the sensation is coming from. Even the G-spot isn't really just a spot. It includes part of the clitoris. So no matter where the stimulation is coming from, the clitoris is involved.
There's I know a small percentage of women who say that they can, well, have nocturnal orgasms, which has been something that's been happening to me more frequently during pregnancy.
Yay!
Woohoo! Get pregnant. Everyone should get pregnant right now. College students, just like it's fine. You can do both. It's totally fine. No. So how do you then explain some stuff like nocturnal orgasms where theoretically there's no direct contact, or there are some women who claim that they can come from touching their breasts and their nipples? Like, what are your theories on that, or the theories on that?
Yeah, and some women can think themselves to orgasm, like you said, nipples. We don't really know enough, except we do know that there's a lot of nerve endings going from our genitals to our brain, from all other areas, erogenous zones, and there's a lot of still mystery around female orgasm, and that's one of them, of how does this happen? But we do know that the people who can orgasm from thinking, which is still pretty rare, they're generally more mindful, and really more able to really focus on their sensations. So do some meditation, get pregnant, whatever.
But I learned a lot about my body in actually, for the first time in my life, trying actively to get pregnant. And I read this book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which is a classic book about fertility. And I went to a pretty good public high school here that had a pretty good sex education. But what no one told me was, so the stuff that comes out of our vaginas, like the goop, the discharge, whatever you call it, that's actually called cervical mucus. And if you understand what the consistency of the mucus is throughout your cycle, you can actually know exactly where you're at in your cycle. And no one tells you this. They just say it's normal to have discharge on your underwear, or it's normal to see yellow or white spots. That's actually tells you exactly what's going on inside your body. And I just highly recommend Googling it. For instance, before you ovulate, which is when you release the egg, most women notice that there's suddenly the stuff that's coming out of their vagina is like literal egg whites. And so if you think about times that you suddenly are sitting in an auditorium like this and you're like, I feel wet, did I pee myself? And you go and you're like, oh, I'm really wet for some reason, this is really weird. You actually might be about to ovulate, and no one fucking tells you that shit. And it's just Google cervical mucus, and it is such an interesting way to track your cycle and also track when you're suddenly feeling horny or not feeling horny, because in studying my own body in getting pregnant, what she was talking about, you get horny right before you ovulate, and then there are all these hormones that drop after you've ovulated because you don't need to be horny anymore, and your mucus can tell you so much. I just Google it. It's really interesting. Are there any studies about, are there certain cultures or countries where the pleasure gap, the orgasm gap is less? What are the demographics?
So it's pretty big everywhere, but the place it's the smallest is in the Netherlands.
Of course. I mean, they have everything there. Why?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, what do? They start teaching sex ed early on. It goes all the way through high school. They actually mention the clitoris in their sex ed.
Why is female pleasure so left out of the cultural conversation, as well as even very good sex education programs?
The patriarchy. I mean, it's so insidious. It runs through our culture, that we are fearful of women's sexuality, that we don't want to talk about women's sexuality. Think about, one of my favorite things to think about, although I'm a little weird, is the words we use. Think about the fact we use sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same. But intercourse is how most men orgasm, not most women. Also, we call our entire genitals a vagina. By doing so, we are linguistically erasing the part of ourselves that gives us the most pleasure, and we're calling our entire genitals by the part that gives men the most pleasure, not women themselves. So the devaluing of women's sexuality is just so deeply ingrained in the patriarchy.
What are the other implications if you aren't aware of how you come or how your partner comes? I know that you've talked about pain during sex. There are so many other health implications. I would love to hear you discuss that.
Well, pain during sex, thank you for bringing that up. It's so prevalent. There was a study that came out that said 33 or 34% of women reported pain at their last instance of penetrative sex, and only a small percent said something to their partner. It also gets into consent issues. If we don't teach women that sex is supposed to be pleasurable, they are going to be much more likely to tolerate pain and much less likely to recognize coercive sex. Pleasure, teaching women this is for you, this is supposed to be fun, is going to change things.
What is the best way? We talked about a question that you love to get asked. What is the best way that you can come with a partner, no matter if you've known them for a while or you're just meeting them?
So, and I want to get back to like the hookup thing, but the best way for a woman to orgasm is to get the same kind of stimulation you get when you're alone. When we are alone, 99% of us touch ourselves externally. Sometimes alone, sometimes coupled with penetration. Yet the penis enters the picture and we think, oh, we don't need that. And we expect ourselves to come another way. So it's such basic but weirdly underutilized advice. Get the same kind of stimulation when with a partner as you get alone. And
then the hookup addendum is how do we make this 7% go up to 7.5%?
Say what you want. I mean, I hear so many women say, oh, that would be pushy, that would be weird. Why? I mean, that goes back to that deeply ingrained belief that it's not for us. I mean, it's say what you want, or take your hand and do it yourself. I mean, there's no shame in that. And, I have a student who put on her Tinder profile, I'm into closing the orgasm gap. And she had a lot of luck.
Is there anything to, I think I've heard different things about vibrator usage, about that it can damage your nerve endings or dull your nerve endings, or you can use a vibrator too much. Any water to those theories?
None.
Great.
If you don't have one, get yourself a vibrator. Women have been using vibration for your clit loves it. Yeah. I mean, this is something that's crazy. In the old days, women used to put a bunch of bees in a box. And then they'd hold it to themselves. Aren't we lucky? We can just go on Amazon.
Ow. Ouch. I would love to hear more about the history, actually, of not only how women have pleasured themselves, but also how we viewed female pleasure. What is a brief history of that?
There's a really intense history of women's sexuality, except for a very brief period in the 60s, of women's sexuality always being secondary to men's, and the clitoris coming in and out of focus. We could go so far back that this has happened, but let me just fast forward to Freud, because that's just so key to all of this. Do you know he actually said that once you got mature, that you would transfer the sensitivity from your clitoris to your vagina? That's like saying when you grow up, you'll start breathing through your ear. We just don't do that. And even in medical textbooks, they used to not put the clitoris in. It's been in and it's been there. They took it out, they put it in, they took it out, they put it in. It's just been ignored for centuries. There's a great video called Ode to the Clitoris by Dorian Electric. And yeah, Google it, and it gives you this incredible history of the clitoris. And I can't remember all the details, but the bottom line is it's been erased for a long time.
I did ask my lovely husband, who is a very giving person, I said, do you have any questions for someone who is an expert in orgasms? And he wanted to know, and it's a joke, but I actually think this is important to discuss. Orgasm face. How stupid is too stupid? Thoughts on that?
Is he worried about his orgasm?
I don't know. I don't know. He just wanted to know. I think it's a rhetorical question. But I think that in general, what it speaks to is how do you get over, I think there's a fear women should, ask for what they want. You should demand what you want. And I think there's a fear that I know I've had, and I think that women have in general, of looking stupid during sex and making a fool of themselves. How do you get over this other than just saying get over yourself?
Okay, so I think it is a great question, actually, because if you're monitoring yourself, how does my orgasm face look? How does my stomach look? How does my butt look? Am I taking too long? You're never going to have an orgasm, because you cannot be in your head and having an orgasm. Having an orgasm requires a complete and total self-focus. That's the irony. When you have an orgasm, your brain shuts off. You're not thinking at all. And so the best way to learn that is to practice it in your daily life. Yoga, meditation, mindfulness, it actually works because it teaches you to turn off your brain, to stop self-monitoring, and also to be able to bring yourself back when you do. And that's what you need to orgasm, to be able to turn off that self-monitoring. And your face looks just fine. It's beautiful, I mean, it's total and complete pleasure.
That's such a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that question too. I'm so glad you asked it. I mean, that makes the conversation so much harder. I mean, and there are so many, and I mean, anyone can email me and I'll pass them along if you want. My email's pretty easy to find. There are sex-positive people in all of the communities that you mentioned working tirelessly to make change and to bring sex positivity. So I don't have an easy answer except that it's to acknowledge that it's way harder. It's definitely way harder. And that means that you'll need extra support and extra people who are thinking the same way and sex positive. And there are like some real leaders in all of those communities doing that work.
And just to add, like I think that something that's been freeing for me, and I know for other people in general, is learning the science of like, it takes it out of the subjective of, okay, if we're not willing to talk about how I come, did you know that blah, blah, blah percentage of women can literally only come from this direct stimulation? This is how scientifically like a woman's body works. And I wonder about just busting out those like hard and fast facts might help educate or convert some people. But again, hardly an authority.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. It also makes me think, and I know you're asking about a lot of different communities. The one thing that, a story that I can tell that it's just really touching and poignant for me was an extremely religious older woman I worked with who had never had an orgasm and was dealing with some of what you're talking about in terms of her husband and her whole culture. And you just cued me to think of that. It was providing her with the science. And it wasn't my line, it was hers. She left. She did some research on the clitoris. She came back and she said, you know, you're right. The clitoris is the only organ in the male body, male or female, designed just for pleasure. I think it's God's gift to me. And I'm going to use it, and I'm going to teach my husband to use it.
Wow. Did she?
She did.
That's good. Thank you for that fucking question. That was like brave and badass of you to ask. Like, thank you.
Ask her.
Yeah.
No, really. I mean, I'm not joking. I mean, ask her what she needs. Have her, I mean, we along with the images of the penis goes in and the orgasm happens, we also have images of no one talks and everybody knows just what to do. Talk to her. Not in bed either. On a walk, over coffee. You know, say, your orgasm is really important to me, and I'm noticing that you're not having as many, and I'd really like you to. Can we talk about what you need? Can we figure this out together? And some women need a very specific type of stimulation, and encourage her. It's totally okay. She can touch herself during intercourse. She can touch herself after. It doesn't make it less sex. You can do lots of other things, but what it sounds to me like you really care, which is great, and you need to have a conversation.
Gosh, I mean, practice. I think that like practicing being assertive in other aspects of your life. I mean, I really think that I'm a relatively assertive woman, but like, even I default to like, I don't want to make someone mad at me, or this is going to be weird, or I'm going to look like an idiot. Or there was one time on set where, it was a couple years ago, I was doing like a seduction scene, and I like did a take where I was like, kind of normal, and then I did another take where I was like, hi, like really sexy. And the director, who was Australian, so I'm going to do a bad impression of his accent, he's like, hey, Rachel, so that time you were really sexy, but when you were sexy, it came off as actually pretty creepy, yeah? So, could you go back to the way you were doing it before? Yeah, because when you weren't trying to be sexy, it was actually way sexier, yeah? And I was like, thanks, Stuart. You've actually confirmed my worst fears about myself. Cool, awesome, great. And like I was knee deep in a show about sex, and even then I was like, oh my God, I look like an idiot. Oh my God, he's right. I mean, so yeah, how do we, other than just like, saying, writing a mantra and lipstick on our mirror and like being assertive in other aspects of our lives, like what are some other tips that you have?
Yeah, I think you said it beautifully. I mean, I think it's up here. It's really embracing that you have every right to figure out what you want and ask for it in bed. Or not even ask, say, I want this. And I think practicing it outside. The two kind of communication tips that I love, that I feel like truly have the power to change lives in and out of the bedroom, and they sound so simple, but they're so hard, is one, don't ask people questions that aren't really questions. Do you want to have sex tonight? I mean, it could mean like, I am so horny, I hope you do, or I'm so exhausted, I hope you don't. And start really, like, it takes women especially, because we've been socialized to put all our focus on out there. How are they doing? How are they feeling? But the first step is go inside, figure out what you want, and then practice saying it not as a non-question, but as a very clear I statement. I mean, it sounds hokey, but it really will, and it can have the power to change your life. And you're not going to get it immediately. You're going to have times that, I mean, I'm pretty assertive too, and there are times that I just like go, ah! It's not easy stuff, but it takes practice, and I really like what you said. Practice it outside of the bedroom first, and then take it in the bedroom. I think it goes back to breaking the norm, breaking the patriarchy, breaking the silence, supporting each other, not slut-shaming each other, not slut-shaming yourself, like actually asking them, a friend, did you have fun? Did you have an orgasm? What do you need to orgasm? Let's talk about how we can ask for what we want. Like, support each other. I mean, I'm sort of answering your question with sort of, it feels like an obvious answer, and I don't really know how to give you more advice, except for I have always found in my life that the thing I'm the scaredest to say is the thing that reaps the most benefit. So take that risk. Open the conversation. Be the one that is the leader in making that change in your friend group.
And I think also, though, something, when I was in college, before I'd realized that I was like the majority of women who needed direct stimulation of my clitoris to come, I would talk to other women sometimes, and I'd be like, yeah, I've never just come from penetration alone. And I had upwards of like 3 women be like, oh, it just means you haven't relaxed enough. But they were speaking from their own situation where like they had come from penetration. So I think that just being also mindful of like your technique for your own vulva might not be, it's not a one size fits all. And I think asking the like, pun intended, probing questions without then being like blamey or shamey. And like my friend Emma wrote a book called Moan, which is a compilation of anonymous essays from women talking about how they orgasm. And there are essays in that book of some women who've never had orgasms, and they're like, the worst thing is when your friends are like, have you masturbated? But you just should be masturbating harder. And it's like, I've fucking tried everything. I just need someone to talk to. So I think finding that level of like asking the necessary questions, but not shaming into like, well, that's how my body works. And if your body's not working like this, then something might be wrong.
Got that.
Squirting.
Squirting. Let's
What
talk
is
about
it?
squirting. Okay. So there are 2 types of squirting. Okay. I wish my puppet was more involved, but there's two types of
Do you want me to put the water bottle in it and douse the audience?
Actually, that's how squirting is filmed in a lot of porn. They take a douche.
I feel betrayed. How dare they?
And they fill the woman's vagina up until she can't hold it anymore, and then they run and they film. I mean, unless they get an actress who really squirts, there's actresses that have talked about this. Actual squirting comes out of the urethra, not the vagina. So it's not even the right hole that they're doing in porn. But anyway, so actual squirting comes from what's called the female prostate gland. So the urethra runs right above the vagina. And it's a very delicate tube, which is why a lot of people get bladder infections after penetrative sex. Anyway, there's a sponge that wraps around it called the female prostate gland. Anyway, squirting is produced there, and there's two types. There's one that's like a little bit like a teaspoon of white milky fluid, and it comes out of the urethra. And then the squirting, the studies they've done on this, and please don't freak out and feel bad if you squirt, this is just science, is that white milky fluid mixed with diluted urine. And it's neither bad nor good. Some women squirt, some don't. There's some evidence that we all squirt, but for most of us who don't squirt externally, it actually goes retrograde back into the bladder. But here's the most important thing. Sorry, more than you wanted to know. I'm sorry, my brain is just full of sex nerd facts. But here's what's happening. Because so much porn shows squirting, a lot of women are thinking they should squirt. And don't try to make your body do something it doesn't do naturally. There's evidence that people who try really hard to squirt are harming their pelvic floor muscles. It's sort of like however you orgasm is how you orgasm. If you squirt, you do. If you don't, you don't. And there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just another beautiful way that women vary.
And just to clarify, everyone here knows that we got two holes. Because some women don't realize the pee-pee, it doesn't come out of your vagina. There's like, if you look in a mirror, and I really do recommend the mirror thing. Just look in a mirror and you spread it. There's the vagina, and then you'll see a little tiny hole over the vagina, because a lot of people think it's the same hole, even those who have that plumbing. Yes. 2 holes. 3 if you count the butt. 5 if you count ears. And then, yeah.
I'm glad you asked. I am so glad you asked, and there are there's no bad questions. That's what this is about. Everybody
That's
to
actually
learn.
a fantastic essential question that I'm shocked we haven't even touched on yet.
So I'm gonna. It's a little hard to manage the puppet and the microphone.
Here, let me hold the microphone for you. That way you can have both hands free for the puppet.
Thank you. Okay. So this is a vulva, and so this is the clitoral glands, and this is the hood. And I really do recommend you get a good picture of what a vulva looks like, and eventually look at yourself when you're ready. After marriage is fine. But here's the vagina, and here's the clitoris. So the penis going in and out is usually just not enough action to get the clitoris. Sometimes it can by pulling the inner lips, which are attached to the clitoris. But yes, you're exactly right. There's lots of motions. A favorite one for people is rubbing the clitoral hood. Some people also like to rub on the side of the clitoris, like that. And some people favor one side or the other. Some people like the right, some like the left. Some people like to tug the inner lips, pull the inner lips. But yes, some people like to also, there's an area called the mons up here, which is like, it doesn't sound very sexy, but it's a fatty mound right above your pubic bone, and the internal clitoris goes there too. So some people like to push their hand there. So yeah, it's stimulating this whole area, this whole external area, which is called a vulva. And the vagina is just the whole, and the clitoris is part of it. So yeah, just putting your hands and playing around and seeing, having your husband's, future husband's hands play around and see. Yeah.
And it's like, and I should say as some, no, I don't need the puppet. It's a mix of like, you'll find that like once you, and whenever you feel comfortable, I do recommend obviously like seeing what works with you on yourself, because that way you can go into a marriage informed. But basically you'll find that if what gets you off is like physically using your fingers to touch yourself, there are certain positions that are really conducive to that. And, or when you're having sex, there are certain ways that like when you're stimulating your clitoris that like, okay, like a little deeper, a little more shallow, like they kind of go hand in hand. And then there are a lot of women who find that when they have sex, they can basically rub their clits on like the guy's pubic bone, or they can kind of be rubbing. There's certain positions, like if you're on top, where you can rub yourself on the guy, so that is direct stimulation to your clitoris while you're also having sex. But to the outside eye, it would look like you were coming from penetration. But it's the same thing. Rubbing yourself on a guy's pubic bone is the same as reaching down with a hand and touching yourself. And I should also say, because it can be so scary, especially like if you haven't touched yourself yet, like it can feel like, I don't know, it can feel weird, and if you're waiting for marriage, for all of that, no judgment. But if it's a matter of just feeling like squicked out about like, oh, I don't know, I feel embarrassed, just like having a little wine, like, or just a little bit of, if there is a substance that you like, say wine or a little bit of weed, to ease yourself into the moment so that you're not like as embarrassed of being with yourself. 'Tis a tip if you perchance are interested. That is definitely how I've shed some inhibitions, with like glass of wine in me.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't now, but you know.
The other thing you made me think about when you were saying that I want to share, like everyone is different, and a lot of times when some women come from just penetration alone, but mostly it is either touching yourself or stimulating your clitoris in some way while the penis is in you. But here's something I've heard from women that I really want to normalize in case you're one of them. I have talked to women who said, I simply cannot orgasm with a penis in my vagina. It's too distracting. And I see some head nods. And if that is you, that's okay too. I mean, then take turns. That is part of why lesbian sex is so orgasmic. It's not all revolved around the penis and the vagina. There's a turn-taking thing going on. I'll do you, then we'll do me, and that works beautifully too. So kind of figure, like changing the script of foreplay just to get her ready for intercourse. We both orgasm at the same time, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because you cannot be, if you're really going to be immersed in having an orgasm, you can't be like, is he going to do it now? Okay, I should do it too. I mean, timing it, so it's okay to take turns and not orgasm during intercourse, even with your clitoris being stimulated.
And just to be super clear, because I was like wondering about this stuff, is when we say like, when she's saying like touch yourself to understand how someone else should touch you, how that like one-to-one can translate to sex is literally while you're having penetrative sex, also masturbate the way that you would if there weren't a penis inside you. That's literally that's the one-to-one of what we're talking about. And so there are like, there are certain positions that like you can literally reach yourself better the way you'd masturbate if you were alone while he's also fucking you.
Exactly.
Just to be like super clear and blunt. That's such a great question.
You know, it's so sad, isn't it? You're shamed if you do, and you're shamed if you don't. And what you're saying really gets to how there's so much do's, don'ts, shoulds around female sexuality. You know, that, you know, we shouldn't be too pushy and ask for our clits to be stimulated, but we should be super orgasmic. And you're right, it's really hard to get over all those conflicting pressures, you know, and it's, you know, the pressures, there's so many conflicting pressures, like, don't have sex too soon because then you'll get slut-shamed. Well, don't wait too long. I mean, it's just like, whew. I mean, it's so hard to navigate all of that. And, you know, what we really need is probably bigger than this conversation. It's a huge, huge cultural change. And I think that, you know, having conversations like these help with that. But until we're there, which could take a very long time, unfortunately, I don't have a magic answer except figure out what you want and embrace it. You have every right to get whatever kind of pleasure you want or don't want in hookup sex, in relationship sex, you know, and make some mistakes. I mean, again, sorry, my daughter's in the audience, but I can certainly think of some crappy hookups in college. Like, you know, sorry. You know, let yourself make mistakes. It's the only way, and not even mistakes. Let yourself do some things that you can go, that wasn't so good, or that was good. And don't judge yourself as much, and just use those as curious experiences, interesting experiences, to figure out what you want and embrace it. I wish I had a more magic answer, but that's really all I got, because it's hard. What you're asking about is super hard stuff. That is such a great question. And actually, a study just came out and that answers that question partially. That there was a study where they tracked the amount of cuddling and affection after a sexual encounter, and the couples that had the most relationship satisfaction, not just the better sex. And after an orgasm, your body is just flooded with these feel-good hormones and these bonding hormones, and they do kind of pull you to cuddle. So your experience is definitely real and confirmed by the research. You know, there's also some people, though, just like so much variation, there's also some people, men and women, who are like, I need some space after. So if you're like a cuddler and you're with I need a space person, it's not going to work, you know? So it's kind of finding that rhythm. The other thing besides cuddling after sex that I highly recommend is the how is that for you conversation. I even know a couple, it's not me, I promise, who after each encounter, they give it a rating on a 1 to 10 scale. What was that for you? A 10. How about you? A 1. But they have this fantastic relationship because it's an entry into a discussion. What made it a 10? What made it a 1? What can we do different next time? So part of the cuddling can also be sort of a, you know, talking about the experience. And then that energy can last days, right? Like little jokes about what happened, you know, the night before, 2 nights before, 2 weeks before, whatever. So, you know, I mean, so what you're talking about is biochemical. Yeah, absolutely. So that is one real difference between female and male orgasm, that we do not have a refractory period. So that means we can have, actually, they shouldn't be called multiple orgasms. What they should be called is sequential orgasms, if that makes sense. Because what it is it is having another orgasm before you lose your arousal. And for some women, one is enough. It's fine. I'm done. I just want to cuddle or, do whatever. Other women sometimes have that feeling like, I could use another and another and another. And there's not one that's better than the other, but if you want to experiment with sequential orgasms, it's basically after an orgasm, don't let yourself go all the way down to relaxed. Move your hand or your vibrator or whatever somewhere else and start the cycle over again. And sometimes you'll end up with another, and sometimes you won't. But yes, we are capable of what should be called sequential orgasms. Whereas for men, there's always exceptions, but the overwhelming majority, there is a refractory period, a period after ejaculation where they're incapable of another ejaculation. The younger the man, the shorter the period.
Why can't you look at porn with him? That's a couple activity. That's very fun. Just to jump in there and say you can absolutely look at porn. It's like, oh my God, I would love to watch porn with you right now. This would be so hot. And it's embarrassing to do at first, but it's absolutely an activity that a lot of couples partake in, is watching porn together. And it's a gateway into a lot of dirty talk, a lot of role playing. It's absolutely can be a couple activity.
You actually, I was going to say the exact same thing. So, no need to repeat it. It's arousing. I mean, we have this image that women aren't visually aroused. We're actually more visually aroused than men. There was one study where women they got off, it didn't matter if they identified as lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, they got off watching women and men, they got off watching women and women, they got off watching babonos. Seriously. We are very visually aroused, even more in this study than men. So I agree with what Rachel said. It is a fun couple activity, and in fact, it's something that a lot of sex therapists recommend to spice things up. And of course, you can think about, certain type of porn might actually turn you on, some might not. It's experiment. Look for porn that turns you on.
And also, I think women actually, I've heard about studies, women actually crave variety and mental stimulation way more than men do. We actually crave difference in partners or sexual varieties, and so I think it's an ongoing, I found, conversation with yourself and myself about what's gonna feel new and exciting, and even though it might be scary to try at first, think well, what do I really want? What will mentally turn me on? And then the internet is full of interesting ideas of how, hey, if you're into, if you'd like your partner to be more, dominant, you could say this. Or if you'd like your partner to be more submissive, here's how you can dip your toe into S&M. Here's a really great 101 activity to get yourself into playing with those mental things. So that idea of you need to be mentally stimulated is so much about what foreplay is, and it's why people role play and dirty talk and BDSM. I mean, it's the whole kink community. It's all part of pleasurable sex with your partner. Well, I'm sure you guys have so many more questions, and every question has been so smart. I can't thank Dr. Mintz enough for flying out all the way from Florida to come here to talk to us.
Thank you. And I can't thank Rachel enough for saying clitoris on TV, for being such an advocate for women's sexuality, for mental health, for everything that she is such a star for, along with her musical creativity and humor, of really, really advocating for people to live pleasurable, sexually empowered lives. So
Thank you. And thanks so much for coming tonight, everyone. Thank you.